Section 3. Challenging Scientific Ontologies. Given the devastating effects wrought by Cartan world on our folk psychological conception of consciousness, it is apposite to ask, what is Cartan world and where did it come from? As regards its origins, two thinkers in particular contributed its predominant features. One was Isaac Newton with his formulation of classical physics, and the other was René Descartes' philosophy of interactive dualism. As to the set of notions which comprise Cartan world, these can be briefly summarized as follows. At the core of this worldview is Newton's vision of the ultimate building blocks of reality as consisting of billiard ball atoms, impenetrable passive particles activated only by external forces such as kinetic energy impacts, gravity, momentum, etc. This is an irredeemably materialist, mechanistic, and reductive worldview. Descartes' contribution initially provided an escape for mind and consciousness via his notion of res cogitans, a separate realm exclusively for thinking stuff. However, as scientific culture advanced and religious belief declined, res cogitans was eliminated from Cartan world, leaving only the materialist, mechanistic, and reductive ontological assumptions of the modern scientific paradigm. Ideological empiricism. Cartanist ontology was then, in turn, profoundly challenged empirically and potentially philosophically by the findings of the new physics, and especially quantum mechanics. However, this challenge was nullified by what I've called a failure of ontological nerve by the fathers of quantum theory, very much influenced by logical positivism. I labeled the most extreme version of this ideological I labeled this most extreme version, the most extreme version of this ideological empiricism. This ontology can be reduced to two basic principles. One, observations are the only reality. There is nothing behind, beyond, or beneath them. Two, speculation in the form of theories, and especially grand ontologies, as to what may exist beyond observations is meaningless and futile. I conclude that the current predominance of these two ontologies, Cartanism and ideological empiricism, is what underlies the failure of contemporary scientific culture to make any progress in formulating a theory of consciousness. In other words, this blockage of thought arises from a combination of A, adherence to an outmoded ontology, and B, a general taboo against all forms of ontology. Accepting sentient consciousness. However, consistent with Whitehead's views, the philosopher Galen Strawson insists that we know exactly what consciousness is. He provides a pragmatic definition of consciousness. Experience of any kind whatever. It's the most familiar thing there is. Whether it's experience of emotion, pain, understanding what someone is saying, seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, or feeling. It is, in fact, the only thing in the universe whose ultimate intrinsic nature we can claim to know. It is utterly unmysterious. These views are part of what Whitehead called hardcore common sense. On the other hand, Strawson claims that the nature of physical stuff is mysterious, except insofar as consciousness is itself a form of physical stuff. This point, which is at first extremely startling, was well put by Bertrand Russell in the 1950s. In his essay, Mind and Matter, quote, "We know nothing about the intrinsic quality of physical events," he wrote, except when these are mental events that we directly experience. In having conscious experience, he claims, we learn something about the intrinsic nature of physical stuff, for conscious experience is itself a form of physical stuff. Having is knowing. According to Strawson, consciousness is a sort of self-confirming phenomena. He says, we know what conscious experience is because the having is the knowing. Having conscious experience is knowing what it is. You don't have to think about it. It's really much better not to. You just have to have it. It's true that people can make all sorts of mistakes about what is going on when they have experience, but none of them threaten the fundamental sense in which we know exactly what experience is just in having it, end quote. When it comes to matter, however, we don't have this privileged self-confirming access. Strawson says, we don't know the intrinsic nature of physical stuff, except, Russell again, insofar as we know it simply through having conscious experience, end quote. The vanishing of substance. As the American physicist Henry Stapp points out, the traditional philosophical notion of substance does not apply to the natural ontological character of the physical aspect of quantum theory. The quantum version of physical is rather described in terms of wave functions or quantum states. It is a potentia or tendency for an event to happen. Tendencies for events to happen are not substance-like. They are not static or persisting in time. When a detection event happens in one region, the objective tendency for such an event to occur elsewhere changes abruptly. Such behavior does not conform to the philosophical conception of a substance, end quote. As the science writer Arthur Koestler once remarked, matter has disappeared in the hands of the materialists.